Welcome to Laurie's Little Studio. I'm Laurie, and today we're going to make this little pot holder. Thank you for joining me, and let's get to it. I need to make this. This is a, I've already cut it out. I've got to press everything, but it's going to be a pot holder that's headed to a birthday person. And so I have some fussy cut fabric. I used my 6.5 inch, I hate it when I can't pick things up. It's a 6.5 inch Omni Grid. I'm sorry for the glare. What is that coming from? Oh, the lamp behind me. Huh, that's weird. Ooh, okay. So anyway, it's an Omni Grid. I've had it forever. It's scratched. It's well loved, and it's a wonderful tool for your sewing room. I'll put it like this. That makes it a little bit more visible. So anyway, 6.5 inches, and it's really easy to fussy cut something that small using a tool like this. I'll link the name of the fabric in the description box below this video. It's pretty popular, and I think it's either Robert Kaufman or Michael Miller. It'll be down there. Anyway, so I decided to go with these two vignettes on that big, huge piece of fabric. There are other animals, obviously. I mean, I had to cut off the ears of the bunny rabbit and the bottom half of the little plump raccoon. And there are other foxes, sleeping foxes, sitting foxes. There are standing up deer, but these are the two that fit that size the best. I'm going to put some Insul-Bright in between. And then I made some bias out of this beautiful watercolor fabric that I think will be a good addition. I think it's kind of pretty. It'll be about this wide by the time we get done. And it is 2.5 inch bias cut fabric. So I decided, since I have another piece of this that I can do a bias cut on, that I would go ahead and do a little mini tutorial on how to cut a piece of bias. I would like to recommend to those who are not confident in cutting bias trim that maybe if you have a sewing tips portfolio notebook, you could add some notes to that, because cutting and using bias trim is important in sewing, but it's not something that we do every single time we sit down and get out our sewing machine and start to do something. So it's easily forgotten, the little steps that might help, make it easy for you. So I'm going to get this packed up out of the way, and I'm going to show you step by step how to cut just a modest amount of bias trim. And if you take notes, it might help you in the future. You just pull out your notebook and go, oh, poof, that's why these ends aren't matching up. They're not at the same angle. I forgot that step. All right, so I'm going to show you guys how I made this bias trim. And if you're interested in keeping a sewing portfolio or notebook of the types of sewing methods that you might not be using all the time and therefore need to refresh your memory on how to do them, now would be the time to go ahead and grab your little notebook, and I will show you one of the ways that I make bias trim. And it's so simple. I hope that you will be able to find some help if you're having difficulty with that. All right, so the first thing I want to do, it's 15 this piece of fabric is 15 by 17, I believe, or close to that. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. If I pressed it, it's probably 15 by 17, I think. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. 16, 17. Okay. That doesn't have to be your measurement, but if you do 15 by 17, you will get 60 inches when you cut it this way with this amount of fabric, and 60 inches is 1 2/3 yards. So if you are doing a project, you're using a pattern, it has a pattern piece, but you don't really want to use the pattern piece for cutting out your bias. You want to just do it your way. And it says you're going to need 1 2/3 yards of bias trim, which that's what this is going to end up being. You know how, in your notebook that you've made these notes, you'll know how to get 1 2/3 yards or 60 inches of bias trim. And also make a note that we don't want to stretch this when we're making it, but the whole point of using a bias trim is for that flex. Our fabric is made so that it has straight lines that run this way, and it has straight lines that run this way. But when you turn it on a 45-degree angle, so here it is, warp and weft, this way and this way, and you turn it 45 degrees, it will shift a little bit, or it will stretch. It feels stretchier. So you might get 1 2/3 yards measured out, unstretched, but you have the ease to probably go quite a bit further. You know, you're going to be able to kind of bend it and stretch it and make it go around your project. So let's say you're putting it around an open armhole. You might get more than what you actually have. You might have more at the end than you made, is what I'm trying to say. I'm going to take this little towel right here, which is this gingham print. And of course, this would be the way our fabric is woven, this direction and this direction. Looks pretty straightforward. But if we cut it on the bias and we were going to use this as a bias trim, we would have to cut it at this angle right here, and this would be the bias. There is a huge difference between the regular print going in the regular manner, I'm just trying to show you, and the bias, which is now at a very different looking angle, and I can show you on this one. So here is either cross grain or straight grain, and here is either cross grain or straight grain. Here is bias. That's a lot of stretch in there, and that's that flex. All right, so I'll give you a second to catch up with your notes, and of course you can hit pause if you need to. All right, so now that I've ironed my piece of fabric, it's very clear that it's not 100% straight. And in this case, that's okay, because I'm going to take a corner, and then you can take any corner you want, and I'm going to line up an edge so that this little point here is cut right in half, like that. And I'm not stretching it, I'm just going to kind of press it down, and then you can see this is wide, this is less wide. So that's okay, because we're not using this anyway. There could be more of it out this direction. We're still only going to use this amount right here. All right, and then I'm going to either take a rotary blade or in my case some scissors, and I'm going to cut off this extra fabric. I recommend moving slowly. There's no need to rush. If you're in a rush, just try to be really careful and maybe use a rotary blade instead of scissors. Okay, so now that I have this cut just like so, let me get this out of the way, my goodness. Just like so. Sorry, a big jet's taken off from the airport. They get kind of loud. It's weird. I'm just going to kind of press this down. You could do this at the ironing board. Don't stretch it. Just kind of, you know, it probably looks like I'm pulling, but I'm not. I'm just barely running my fingers over the top. And that will make a cut line that's, you know, where you can see it. The main thing here is just try not to stretch your fabric. It isn't going to do you any favors if you stretch it at this point. Okay, so just, if you want to, take it over to the ironing board and just kind of do that. But I'm going to show you just this little bit of hand pressure will cause a fold line right there. Okay, so I am now going to cut from this corner, using this fold line as a guide, to this corner up here. Okay, so now we have these two pieces of fabric, and what I'm going to do is I'm going to take this one and I'm going to put it on top of this one, just like this. And line it up like that. So we're going to take this long edge, you can see I've folded it once, we're going to go fold it up like this and make sure that this is at a point down here. Alright, so get your fabric, sort it out, and fold it up just like so. Alright. Now you can line up that fold along one of the lines on your cutting mat. If you don't have a cutting mat, that's fine. Just have it basically straight in front of you like so. And then take a ruler that has maybe three inches. Most bias trim is cut at 2.5 inches. Some bias trim is cut at 2 inches. A whole lot of bias trim is not cut at 1 inch or 3 inches. But that is not to say that you can't do it. It's just not common. So I tend to cut mine at 2.5 inches. I prefer that extra 1/2 inch just in case. A lot of times it's a little much, but I'd rather have a 1/2 inch more than need a 1/2 inch more. So I go ahead and cut mine at 2.5 inches. It works out great. And a lot of times you get a really good design on that bias. You'll see as you start doing this, you'll see what I'm talking about. Okay, so now you take your ruler, and if you don't have something like this, but you have a cutting mat, you can just use these to mark with. You'll have to pardon me, I think I have the hiccups. It's one of those days. And then if you have an omni grid like this, you can just use this and slide it over And then, you know, mark out where that 2.5 inches is and cut it right off with your rotary cutter. If you don't have a rotary cutter, just take some type of marking device, chalk, even a pencil, because remember the cut edge is going to be folded to the inside. No one will see it. So you could easily mark this with a pencil and it would be just fine. All right, so we're going to go ahead and cut right there. If I can find my, oh, here it is. Okay. Mine isn't very sharp, but I've learned how to live with it. Okay. Press down hard on the ruler, and then for me, I have to go over it several times. Don't do this. Don't be like me with your rotary cutter. Okay, so there's one cut. Set that aside. And then for this size, you can get one more 2.5 inch cut. Okay, and then you're left with some interesting little bits and bobs for future projects. All right, so now what? All right, this is the part that I think a lot of confusion occurs, but I can help you with that right now. And this is probably noteworthy if you're making notes. So here you have, you're going to unfold it, and you're going to have two pieces of bias trim that we're going to turn like so. And look at that. The angles here and here and here and here are opposite of each other. So we have a set with the angle running up this way and the angle running up this way, and a set with the angle running up this way and running up this way. Facing up, they're not the same. In order to get this to work pretty much the way you need it to work all the time, these angles have to be the same. So we're looking for the one in this particular case that matches up with the angle that is running this direction right here. Just randomly I've chosen that one. If I try to get this one to match up, the way I do it is I take the one on on the bottom closest to me, and I pick it up and I turn it over right here, and I am not finding what I need. And that's because these two angles are opposite of each other. Now I'm going to pick up one that has the same angle right here. I'm going to do the same thing. Get it where you guys can see. And what I want to do is match up this long edge with this long edge right here. And there you go. So I'm going to show you the other thing that we were just doing, we were trying to do. So this one is matched up just like it should be. And I'll prove it by, we'll pretend like this is stitches. It's stitched together. Like, ouch, always poke myself. Okay, we've stitched it together, so now we can open it up, and we have this right here, right there. It doesn't look as pretty with the pin, but that's what it would be if we stitched it. Okay, but let's, just to make sure that this is being understood, let's take the one that has the opposite angle right here. This one is running down, That one is running up. Now I'm going to try to match up this long edge with this long edge. Well, that does match up, but that's not how you sew bias. You sew bias like so, so that when you open it out, you still have a bias edge. And if I stitch it together like so, again using the pretend stitching method, we've pretended like, oh, we're making bias, we're gonna stitch our long edges together. This is what we end up with. And that is not what we want. We want a straight piece of bias trim. I mean, we literally just have a big mess on our hands. So let's go back in time. Now we know we want it to go like this, so that when we open it up, it will fold out and be straight. Well, I can't get this edge to match up with that edge. This edge and this edge are polar opposites of each other right now. So when I have two pieces of fabric facing fabric right sides up, and they look like that, I know I'm not going to be able to get that to work. It's not going to happen. That does not work. But if I have two pieces of fabric with the same angle, facing up, I can get this edge to match up with this edge like so. And the other fun thing about this perfect match up is, depending on my bias fabric, if I am lining it up and I open this up and I look and I don't like where that seam on the fabric is, the print just isn't going to work for me, I can move this. I can move it all the way down here, and I can stitch it and open it up, and then I can just trim off whatever I need to trim off. So it doesn't make any difference if I have it here where the two raw edges are, or if I need to slide it down and have it be in a different place. So once we get that sorted out, we're going to make a stitch. And the way we do this stitch is, I'm going to pin, and I want to pin this way. And I usually, with my 2.5 inch bias trim, I will put 2 pins in. That might be also noteworthy, okay? And now I am going to draw a line so that you can see what I'm talking about. I'm just going to use felt tip because I want it to be visible, and I think this might be. Now when I sew these, I'm not going to draw a line, but I'm going to draw the line so that you guys can see where I'm going to be stitching. So I will stitch from this little V right here to this little V down here. So let's just all right. All right, so right here, where this fabric is intersecting with this fabric, and all the way down to here, where it ends, that's where I'm going to be stitching my bias trim. So let's do that now. And I just recommend that you use your sewing machine's default stitch length. Mine happens to be 2.5 on the Bernina's 1080 Special. I just let the default stitches ride, and I do stitch with my needle in the needle down position just for safety's sake. If I have to stop, I don't want this to slide. And that needle will act like a third hand and help you hold. And you know I don't ever stitch over pins. And I also, some people might do a lock stitch on their bias, but I don't, because I feel like it might stretch it. And those stitches are going to get cut anyway, because when we turn our bias trim, so this is what it looked like when I was stitching it, just like so. I stitched right here, and now I have my seam allowance just on the outside edge of that stitching. I think maybe you can see that. I am going to trim it down. I'm not going to worry about the dog ears yet. That's what this and this are. I'm just going to trim this down to about 1/4 of an inch. Now I'm going to cut that little dog ear and this little dog ear. Normally I'm not doing it in midair. So anyway, now when I open this up, it just is perfection. Absolute perfection. I do recommend that you take this over to the ironing board and you press it like this, just like this. Just hit it with the iron. Then open it out and press it again with your iron. Just press. And that will help set that seam and make everything just look absolutely perfect. All right, now the second thing I wanted to show you, a piece of fabric that is cut about 18 inches by 21 inches. So it's not the same thing as a 1/4 yard of fabric. It's basically a 1/2 yard of fabric that is cut in a special way to equal that 18 by 21. So what I need you to do is have a piece of fabric that is cut 18 inches by 21 inches. Now some fat quarters are going to vary slightly. Sometimes you will have a fat quarter that is 19 by 20 or 21. So there might be an inch variance on either one of those measurements. But for the most part, a fat quarter is 18 by 21 if it is cut from fabric that is 44 to 45 inches wide. That can make that difference if the fabric is differently widthed. Oh my goodness, trying to come up with the words today. Wow. Anyway, if you have a fat quarter of fabric, I can show you a way to cut bias trim. If you have striped fabric that's cut in a fat quarter size, you will probably love the way it comes out. It is such a cute thing to have on hand. Okay, I'll be right back. All right, I'm going to use a Santee print. If you have any fabric at all, just cut a fat quarter. So you will have 18 by 21. Okay, and then find the center. And I'm going to mark mine so that you guys can see it, but you could do it just by folding, you know, using finger pressing, but I am going to use a friction pen. Friction ink is erasable, heat erase. All right. And we'll fold it again this way. Okay, I think you can see that right there. And what I'm going to do next is take this corner right here and fold it just past that halfway mark. And then I'm going to bring this corner up here just past that halfway mark so that they are lined up like this. I want this fold that I just created even with this part of my fabric, so I'll straighten that out and kind of finger press that down. And then this one right here, I want even with that. And that kind of gives me the point of reference for how far in to fold. So I've got this. Now I'm going to turn my fabric this way. And I'm going to lift this right here up and bring it up to this fold right here. Then I'm going to take this right here and bring it up again. So I should have 3 folded edges to see. And I want it on my cutting mat in front of me this way, not this way or long way. I need it to be this way, right in front of me. And then I'm going to start right in the middle. And I can use my little 6.5 inch because it's small enough and it'll go right over this. Okay, so somewhere, oh, here's my center is right here. That's the mark that I made with the friction pin. It's right there, which is why I mark on both the front and the back. Okay, so let me slide this over. Right, and you want to make sure that this part of your fabric is straight on a line. Okay, now we're going to cut. And I'm going to set this one aside for now, and I'm going to work on this. And I'm going to go across 2.5 inches. So here's 2.5. And of course you can use that 1/2 inch mark on your ruler. And again, 1, 2.5. Keep that straight across the bottom. Straight. Okay, and I'm left with that same, basically that same shape that I had before. And I have 3 strips of beautiful bias fabric. One will be sort of a short, one will be a little bit longer, and then this one will be the longest. And this one will probably be the longest of all, even if after I cut this section right here. Now I'm going to pick this one up and turn it around to make it easier for me to cut. And and there's that piece again. So this is pretty much the final cut. And now, if we take all of this and measure it out. Okay, so we got 2.5 inches. We got 2.5 yards. That's still a lot of bias trim from a relatively small piece of fabric. These are 2-inch wide, 2.5 inch wide. Let's measure. Yep, there's the 1/2 inch right there. So they are 2.5 inches wide and 2.5 yards, which is wonderful. All right, so there's that. With Insul-Bright, I would always put a note with this product, if you're giving it as a gift, to not put it in the microwave. I don't know why somebody would put a pot holder in the microwave, but just in case, this metal fabric, I don't know what else to call it, runs all the way through this, and it's needle punched batting that has that metal in there to kind of help protect your hands from excessive heat. So definitely let them know that it has a product in it that contains metal and it is not safe for the microwave. The other thing I want to say is, if you have a pair of scissors that you don't cut fabric with, that is what I would use to cut your Insul-Bright with. What I want to do is cut 2 pieces. I want to have 2 pieces inside of this pot holder just for the added protection. All right, and I'm going to just cut it smaller than my pot holder, and I can do that using my 6.5 inch ruler off of the corner. And if I split an inch, I'll have a 1/2 inch and I'll have a 1/2 inch. So let's cut it there. So I've got 1 inch off of this end and 1 inch off of this end. And then I'll just shift it to the center of the pot holder. This was not lined up. If you're going to cut 2 layers at once, they have to match. So, of course, the other option is to just cut it a 1/2 inch smaller all the way around. But because I'm not going to do that, oops, I'm upside down. There we go. 1 inch and 1 inch. And you can mark it and then cut it if you want to. All right, so let's see. If I center this right in the middle, then I should have about a 1/2 inch all the way around, which it looks like I do. And there we go. Perfect and perfect. Now I need to go press my fabric, so I'm going to take care of that. While I'm pressing, I'm going to take spray and bond, and I'm going to bond these 2 pieces of Insul-Bright together. And if you don't line it up right, you can just reposition as needed. Okay. All right, so I'm going to let that dry. Kind of set up a little bit while I press these real quick. So while I was pressing my bias, I suddenly thought to myself, why was I so fixated on the double fold when I'm not going to be using double fold? I don't know. I'm using single fold, and the reason for that is I want my, and every project will be different in that regard, by the way, but I'm going to have this, obviously not that end, but this stitched, and then I will fold this over and to the back, and that's what it will look like when I'm done. So I don't know why I was so focused on the double fold. Just trying to overthink and make things more complicated, I guess. So first things first, I'm going to respray both sides of this so that the outside of each side has some spray and bond on it. I'm going to put my fabric. I can move it as I need to. The way I'm going to do that is just to make sure that's there, and I'm using the edge of my fabric to line up this piece right here. Okay, now I'm going to quilt this little guy. And normally I would do my squiggle quilting, but this is a gift, so I think I'll go ahead and mark it with my friction ink. And I'm going to start up here. Use what you're comfortable with. Here we go. All right, so right down the middle from corner to corner. And I'm not marking it dark, I'm just kind of drawing a faint line. Okay, and now I'm going to use that line and go 1 inch. Make sure that the 1 inch is on that line that I just drew. Okay, 1 inch, and do another 1 inch. You know, use a quilting foot and just freehand it, or do a different quilting grid, however you want to do that. I need to use a different color of bobbin thread. I think I'm going to use, let's see, my sister's favorite color is green. Let's see what I have in the way of thread. Yeah, I think I'm going to go with this one. All right, I'll be back in a minute. I've got to wind up my bobbin. Okay, if you've been following me for a while, you know that every time I change George's bobbin, I clean the sewing lint out of the feed dog area of my sewing machine and around the bobbin case and hook. So that's what I was doing. Get this machine threaded. This machine is not a self-threading sewing machine, but it doesn't bother me. All right, here we go. I'm gonna go ahead and just do this as quickly as possible, and I'll see you back here. I took this off. I'm gonna put it back on because it adds a little bit of support to George's sewing area. Normally I just have the arm, but when I put the little box on, I get a bigger space. Alright, we're done. I'm just going to trim off all these little threads. Alright. Alright, I'm going to take it over to the ironing board so that I can remove all of that friction ink on this side. This is what it will look like when it's completed. There's a couple threads I need to just clip. There we go. Oh. Alright, now we need to decide how, where, what we want the little hanging loop to look like. And I think most, I'm going to go ahead and cut this off where the angle is on our pretty bias trim. Alright. And the way that I do this is I start in the center, and I start in the center where I plan to put the hanging loop, and that way if there's anything that looks amiss, I can kind of hide it with that. But what I need to do is measure around always check to see if you have enough, and then add a couple of inches about there. Okay, so that's the trim. And I think for the little loop, I will create a piece of double fold, and that's just simply bringing that to the center, bringing this to the center, and then folding it like so. I think I'll pin it. That is definitely going to be enough. Well, maybe one more. All right, so the way to make that is to stitch on the open folded edge, so you'll have two folds like this, not one fold like this. But I want to fold the raw edge in, so I'm going to keep these two long edges folded, and then fold this down on the inside, and then fold it over on top of itself. like so, and then just kind of push those raw ends inside, because we're going to be stitching down over the top of those so that they won't be visible. Pin it like that, and then do the same thing on the other end. Just fold it down, fold it back on itself, and take that pin and push these little, you know, the ends that want to stick out. Just push those to the inside. Okay. There we go. Alrighty. And then we're going to stitch right down that edge. And I'm also going to stitch down the fold on the other side. Alright. And that will be our loop. I tend to prefer the corner, so I think that's what I'm going to do on this one. They tend to hang kind of cute. I'm not going to encase the ends of mine because I finished the ends. I don't have to worry about having it up underneath my binding. These threads are driving me crazy. There we go. Okay. All right. So the next little bit is to put your bias trim raw edges together with your placemat or your pot holder and pin that in place. I'm going to do it with a basting stitch. We're going to see what my idea looks like. So I'm going to start stitching right here. I have different ways that I do bias trim depending on, this pen is ruined, I'm going to have to put it in my little box over there. Depending on how I do the bias trim, if I fold it this way, clearly it's going to be done a different way than if I fold it with a double fold. But I am going to use a big, long, huge, easily removed basting stitch and see what I think of this idea. It's almost like upholstery in a way, where you have it come up to the edge. Okay, and then you turn. Yeah. Okay, now I do not want to stitch right up to this, so I am going to stop about 1/4 of an inch away, trim all my threads, and then I have to check. I think, yeah, right here is a spot that I got a little bit too close to that edge. So this right here needs to be reinforced. Okay. So cute. Now I'm going to take this trim and I'm going to cut it oh, I don't know, about an inch from where this one starts. I'm going to fold this in so that the raw edges are inside. Like that, and then slip the one with the raw edge right inside. I'm going to, actually I should not have stitched these down. I remember thinking that, but that's okay. They'll be easy enough to just take out a couple of these stitches, and if I do it again, if I make another one, I need to remember that these stitches are supposed to be left, or this end is supposed to be left unstitched so that they can kind of nest together. Okay, perfect. So fold in, and you don't have to fold in both, just one, the one that's going to be on the outside, and it will get sort of wiggled into place like so. If you have a stiletto, often that is the best method. And then kind of check it, you know, fold it back and see what you think of that, which I think looks fine. Make sure that all those edges are even, and then stitch it down. Check all of the edges and the sides and all that. Okay, it looks like everybody has been stitched down. And I'm just going to flip this around to the back, like so. And I'm going to press it because I want it nice and flat while I try to sew it. Yep. I feel like I need to cut a little bit more away from some of these corners. Okay, all right, so this is this side stitched, and I have not stitched this yet. I am going to stitch mine by hand because I want it to look completely finished, and I know that if I go around this with my sewing machine, it won't be as tidy on this side as I want it to be. So I'm going to go ahead and stitch that by hand, and then for my little handle, I'll get these threads clipped off. I'm just going to have it stitched down like so. Now if I want to, I can put a button, and if I had a little woodland creature button, I might do that. Unfortunately, those are likely to melt, and this is a pot holder after all, so we don't need that to happen. But this I'll stitch on by machine because I want it to stay. Alright, so I'm going to get this done by hand, and I will be right back. Alright, so I have gotten it stitched all the way around, front and back. Here's the little deer and the bunny and our fun little fox and butterflies, and sort of half underground, I guess. He's hiding in the weeds. Little raccoon. And now I'm going to take this little loopy thing, and I'm just going to attach it like so. Usually when you put these on, you want it where it's open. I have found they just tend to hang better when they're open. And then eventually, over time, when you wash them and iron, you don't iron them, but you know what I mean. You use them, you put hot plates on them and stuff. They end up looking something like that. But they do hang on things, you know, pretty well. I know you can't see what I'm doing, but let's just pretend like this is something that they could hang on. They just kind of loop over. So that's how I'm going to do it. And I'm going to use my blanket stitch on my sewing machine. And clip those threads. Okay. And there we go. And then if you wanted to, I suppose you could put a button on there. I'm not going to worry about it. It'll just, you know, just hang from its little thing. I'm going to put this in the envelope to get it ready to send out. It's a cute little pot holder. It has 2 layers of Insul-Bright. It will not work in a microwave, but if you have something like a tabletop that you want to protect, this would be great. If you want to pull something out of the oven, this would be great. And if you wanted to hold a hot pot handle, this would be great. It also would just decorate your kitchen if you don't want to use it. So thank you so much for watching today's video. I appreciate it so much. If you liked the video, please give it a thumbs up. And if you haven't already subscribed, please consider doing so. I would love to have you join us on a regular basis. If you hit that little bell, it will remind you when I have a new video up. And I will see you next time. Thank you. Bye.